Hello, welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison, and I talk about prison stuff. Today I'm going to be talking about my time in the hole. I'm picking up where I left off, where I was telling you my story through the prison system. I'd gone to the hole, I'd gone to the hole within the hole, and I'm going to pick up there. Before I get started, I want to apologize if this seems disorganized or if the lighting changes or my clothes change, because this is going to take several attempts. This is a video that is hard for me to do. Being in the hole isn't easy, and it stirs up a lot of negative emotions, and it's hard to think about. So I might have to stop, recording this all in one go. I might have to start and stop several times and stop and start several times. So I apologize for that ahead of time. This is my, I don't know how many times I've attempted this, but we're going to attempt it again because I want to get this out for you. I think it's important. I think it's something that people need to hear. And if I glance down occasionally, I have to have my cheat sheet to kind of organize my thoughts on this because it is hard to think about and I get a little bit lost and distracted on it. But with that said, let's talk about it. So I found myself in an MRA cell. I got in trouble for having a weapon. And I say it's the hole within the hole. It is a slam cell. A slam cell is a cell with two doors. Basically, your cell has an enclosure to the front of it. It's a cinder block wall, and then you have two metal walls that go out to either side of your cell, or from either side of your cell. And it's basically designed so you can't communicate with people in the cells next to you very well. You can't pass stuff from cell to cell, things like that. Because you still have the bars at the front of your cell, and then beyond that, you have that enclosure with the steel walls to either side, so you can't reach out of your bars and pass stuff from cell to cell. You can't communicate very well. It's dark in there. I think I said that. You don't have control over the lights. The light fixture is in that enclosure, and the controls for the lights are usually either on the outside of the cell or they are in that enclosure. That enclosure has a steel door on the front of it, solid steel, and it has a very small window to let in light. And the window has a cover that could be placed over it. The cops can leave you in darkness for weeks at a time. They can turn the light on for weeks at a time just to mess with your sleep schedule. And they do that. There was a toilet and a sink in the cell, and that was also controlled by the officers. Usually they would flush the toilet when they came in at about, 6:30 in the morning after shift change. And, the rest of the day your toilet wouldn't flush. When you're on MRA status, I believe it means minimum restricted access or something like that. Basically what it means is that you get nothing in your cell. You have, a bed and your boxers, and that's it. You don't get any shower shoes. You don't get any hygiene stuff. You don't get any blankets. And it was cold. It was April in Kansas. So I would sleep on the concrete slab and pull the mat over me and sleep under my mat. The mat is about a 2-inch thick foam pad that's covered in plastic. You're on MRA for 72 hours typically. After 24 hours, they'll give you some blankets back. They'll give you some clothes. And after 48 hours, you get some more stuff back. You can have hygiene stuff. And then after 3 days, you can get the property that you're allowed to have. The first night I was in the MRA cell, I just laid down on the concrete slab, pulled the mat over me, and went to bed. It's very dirty in those cells. Not having cleaning supplies, not being able to have a broom. There's dirt and dust and dead bugs, hair, all sorts of stuff on the floor of the cell and on the concrete slab where your bed is supposed to be. So I laid on that concrete slab in the dirt and the grime and pulled the mat over me and went to sleep that first night. The next day, I met one of my neighbors, JR. He knocked on the wall and he called me over to the front of the cell. So you have steel walls to either side of the front of your cell, but you can still communicate a little bit if you speak loudly or if you kind of holler, if you shout. You can still talk to each other if you go to that corner of the cell, and you guys can talk to each other. JR introduced himself, and over the months that I was there, JR would be a very good friend to me. He would kind of help me keep my sanity in that place. And we talked for a while, and we shared stories, and we talked about our families, our friends, and why we were there. I don't remember exactly why JR was there. It escapes me at the moment. But he had been there for a long time. He had been there 6 or 7 months. And he was a good dude. He was a decent friend. The neighbor on the other side of me, so JR was to the left, and to the right of me, there was an individual in a cell who had pretty much lost their mind. They had created this own world in their head. They had been in the hole for so long that they went crazy, and they couldn't differentiate reality from the fantasy that they had created in their head. And they thought that they were in some sort of country that they ruled. And so they would deliver speeches to their people all day because they thought that they were this leader. And they thought that they were addressing their people. And that was what that neighbor did most of the time. I don't remember what his name was. I'm going to call him D. And D would have moments of clarity when he realized that he was in a box, basically. And in those moments of clarity, he would start screaming, horrified, horrific screams. You could tell the extreme fear that he was in. Eventually, the officers would come and take D out. They took him to a mental health unit because they were concerned that he was going to hurt himself in that cell. It's interesting, though, because D actually was sane when he went to segregation, but he was there for so long that he lost it. The day after I arrived in my MRA cell, the DR hearing officer came around, and he asked me if I would like to go to my DR hearing. They're going to have a DR hearing in the unit team's office for my write-ups. I had been written up for having a weapon and disobeying orders. At that point, I didn't care. Honestly, I just didn't care. I was in the hole. They pretty much told me that I could be in the hole indefinitely because they OSR'd me, saying that I was under investigation. I was on restriction, and it basically meant that I couldn't talk to my family. I couldn't order anything off of Canteen except for a few hygiene supplies like bar soap and stuff like that. Couldn't buy coffee. I could only spend $10 a month at Canteen, and that was hygiene products and writing supplies. When the DR hearing officer came around and asked me if I wanted to go to my DR hearing, I basically told him, fuck you. You're going to do it. You're going to find me guilty either way. And I am guilty. So I don't care. You just do what you do. You do your job. And, it is what it is. Let me know what happens. And they did. He wrote me up for not going to the DR hearing as well. And I ended up getting even more time on restriction. I got some disseg, which at that point it didn't matter because I was staying in seg anyway. And I was on restriction, so I couldn't have electronics or anything like that. In total, I had 7 months of restriction to do. So I'm in the hole. I have no idea when I'm going to get out of the hole. It looks like I'm going to be in the hole until the end of my sentence. So 2 years, maybe a little bit more. And, I have no contact with the outside world. Can't use the phone. Can't really afford to talk to my family. And, just a few letters here and there, which is more communication than nothing. So that is something, you know what I mean? After a few days, they let me off of MRA. And when I was off MRA for probably about a week, they started opening the external door, the door to the enclosure, so I could get some sunlight. And I could see out. A lot of times we would take pieces of bread and we would throw it out on the run because in Lansing, it's an old prison. It has big windows, and birds would fly through the windows into the cell house. And we would feed them bread. And so we could stand there at our bars and we could watch the birds, as well as we could see through that doorway in the outer, enclosure of the cell. I knew one of the porters in SEG. He went by Pi. He was a gang member, but he was a decent dude. And he was trusted enough by staff that he would come in and clean the cell houses and do stuff like that for the SEG units. And he would come and talk to me from time to time while he was cleaning. He would bring me cleaning supplies so I could clean my cell. And he would bring me shots of coffee every now and again. So that was really cool. Sometimes JR would have some coffee and he would send it over with Pi, and Pi would give me a cup of coffee. It was nice, Little things like that can make a huge difference when you're in the hole. After a while, I think it was a few months, I'm not for sure, but after a while I was moved to the other side. Out of an MRA cell, they moved me to a regular segregation cell. So I had a new cell and I had new neighbors I didn't really know. The neighbor to my right, I kind of liked him. I don't remember what his name was. I think it was Travis or something like that. I want to say he got in trouble for having a weapon, and so he was under investigation. And the dude to my left was also under investigation. He was under investigation because he got caught with a cell phone. So he was trafficking contraband. I didn't really like the dude to my left too much, just different backgrounds, different principles. He was really loud, kind of disrespectful, kind of obnoxious. The dude to my right I liked. He was quiet, stuck to himself. We would have conversations every now and again because that's what you do when you're in seg for a long time. You have to do what you can to occupy your mind. I would fill my time with a lot of exercise. I would do 500 push-ups at minimum per day. I would pace the cell for probably close to 8 hours a day. And I didn't really have a concrete way of telling time or telling what day it was. I didn't have a calendar. I didn't have a watch. What I did have was meal times. I knew they served chow around 4 o'clock in the morning, around 9:30 in the morning, and between 3:30 and 4:30 at night. And that's how I would measure time during the day. One day I found out what day it was from a staff member, and I made myself a calendar. I had been studying Norwegian before, and there was this very helpful saying that I learned. It was, I don't know, maybe a kid's rhyme or something, but it was 30 dager har september, april, juni og november. And it basically tells you how many days are in each month. So I sat down, I knew what day it was. I asked a staff member, I sat down and I drew up a calendar. So I began keeping track of the date and how many days I had been in the hole. Months began to go by, and after you're in the hole for a while, little things start to change in your mind. You develop obsessions. A lot of people do anyway. When they're in seg for a lot of time, they'll start cleaning a lot. They'll become obsessive about cleaning, about organizing, and things of that nature. I developed those habits as well. I would get up first thing in the morning. I would work out. I would make my bed in a very, very specific way. I would organize the papers on my desk. I would clean. I was very obsessive about little things. And I also became obsessive about what I was eating, how much I was eating, and exercising. That's what I did to occupy my mind. I enjoyed being hungry because it distracted my mind from the fact that I was locked in a cell all the time. And it was the same with exercise. If I could exercise to the point that my body hurt, if I could walk to the point that my hips and my legs and my ankles hurt, then I wasn't thinking about being stuck in that cell. I began to have hallucinations after I was in there for a while. I began to have auditory hallucinations. I would hear strange metal sounds, like metal on metal sounds. I would hear people calling my name and I would come to my bars and shout out, yeah, you know, thinking that somebody a couple cells down was hollering at me or something like that, and they weren't. I also began to have this problem with my dreams. I would dream about being in the hole, you know, being stuck in a cell, and then I would wake up and I would be stuck in a cell. And I had a hard time figuring out if I was dreaming or if I was awake, and what was reality and what wasn't. Something about Lansing that sticks out in my mind is the bugs, the infestation of cockroaches in particular. Lansing has a lot of cockroaches, and they've had to shut the kitchen down before because of that, or at least back then they did, in the Max facility. The Max facility is a very old prison, you know. I think it was built in the 1860s. It's old. It's infested with cockroaches. And I would stay up all night, and I would see these bugs crawling around, you know, and I would kill them. And I would usually pick up these cockroaches that I'd killed with some toilet paper, and then I would throw them in the toilet and flush them. But when I began to be unable to differentiate between what was a dream and what was reality, I stopped flushing them. And if I woke up and I saw dead bugs on the floor, it meant that, you know, when I was killing the bugs, I was awake and I had just woken up from a dream, if that makes sense. My sleep schedule at this time was very erratic. I know I say I stayed up all night or I would exercise during the day. I would basically sleep when I could. I would sleep when I got tired. So sometimes I was up at night. Sometimes I was up during the day, and my sleep was just whenever. Time didn't really seem to matter that much, you know, the time of day. But we had yard at night. And the way they ran yard in the hole, you know, you got an hour of yard per day, and it was on rotation. But it was in the middle of the night, starting at about midnight after shift change. After shift change, which was at 10 o'clock, and evening count, which was at 10:30. Whenever they cleared count, which was usually around 11:30 or midnight, they would start running yard in groups. And they had 3 groups. So they'd take one group out for an hour, bring them in, bring the next group out for an hour, bring them in, take the next group out for an hour. Yard time was basically 1 hour out in a segregation cage, or we called them dog cages. It was a 10-foot by 20-foot enclosure. It was made out of chain link. It looked like a dog cage that you would see in a pound. When we went to yard, we had to cuff up. While we were in our cells, we would back up to the food pass, put our arms behind us. They would handcuff us. Then they would open our doors, and they would escort us out to the dog cage, where they would do the same procedure for taking the handcuffs off of us. They'd put us in the enclosure, close the door behind us, have us turn around with our backs towards the door. They would take our handcuffs off, and then they would leave us there for an hour. There was only one inmate allowed per seg cage, and they had a row of them side by side. So you could go out there, you could see other inmates, you could talk to them through the chain link fence. And then when your time was up, they would take all of us back inside. If they didn't have enough staff to run yard, they would not. If there was inclement weather, they would not run, seg yard. I should also mention how they ran showers in the hole. We were allowed to shower on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And there was a similar procedure for showers as there was with yard or rec. They would handcuff us. They would escort us to the shower cages. So the shower cages were probably 4 foot by 4 foot. And there were 4 or 5 cages side by side. They would escort us to the cages, have us turn around. After the door closed, they would uncuff us, and then we could shower. The water was on for 10 minutes. So after that 10 minutes, if you hadn't rinsed off and stuff, you were just going to be soapy. You had exactly 10 minutes with the water on, then they would cuff you up and take you back to your cell. During this time, they also gave out these little cheap razors. However, we did not have mirrors, and we were not allowed to have mirrors in the hole. So you couldn't really see yourself when you were shaving. Being on restriction, I was only allowed to have bar soap. So I was trying to wash my hair, wash my beard, everything with bar soap. Didn't really go that well. My hair ended up getting pretty greasy and nasty looking. Same with my beard. And I began to pick at my face, because I was deteriorating mentally. And I wasn't really aware of it. I wasn't aware of what I looked like or anything like that because I didn't have a mirror in my cell either. We weren't allowed to have mirrors in our cells. After being down there for 7 months, I was supposed to get my electronics back. I was supposed to be off restriction. And they didn't immediately do that. I inquired about it several times, and they wouldn't bring me my stuff. So I went on hunger strikes. I probably went around 15 days without eating. I would go 4 days without eating, and then I would eat one meal, go 4 more days without eating, eat another meal, go 4 more days. And I did this, over a decent period of time. It was probably about 15 days in a 1 month period that I didn't eat. And that took its toll on me physically. After 3 days of not eating, your body, or my body, I should say, will start to hurt. It almost feels like I have the flu when I go that long without eating because my body begins to cannibalize itself a little bit. And I didn't have a lot of body fat on me. And my body would start to attack my muscles and things like that. I would be pretty achy, I wasn't feeling very good. And my stomach would be upset at that point. I would start throwing up and stuff like that because I had all this stomach acid in my stomach and nothing to digest. So I would get very sick and I would get horrible headaches. So day 3 and day 4 were usually really rough on me, and that's why I didn't go more into day 5 or day 6. That was about what I could take and continue to do that to myself. I'm sure if I were in a situation that required it, I could go longer without eating. But that was the limit of my self-control where I could do that to myself. After doing that for a while, they gave me my electronics back. They took me off restriction. They gave me a lot of my property back, my books, my schoolwork, stuff like that. And I began to do schoolwork again while I was in the hole. I began to work on my college degree while I was in the hole. It helped to distract my mind quite a bit from where I was and what was going on around me. At some point, I began to struggle with suicidal ideation. And I made plans to hang myself on several occasions. I felt like the prison had me on life support. And I felt like they were killing me slowly. And I felt that if anyone was going to kill me, it should be me. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to hang myself. Instead, I began to kill myself slowly. I wouldn't eat very much. I allowed my body to deteriorate. I began to eat like 300 to 500 calories a day. I didn't have any interest in food. And the food that I ate, I was very obsessive over. I didn't like the lunch meat that they gave us. The prison food has a very distinct smell to it, especially the meat, because it's a very low quality. A lot of the stuff we got would be old, past its expiration date and stuff like that. I got on a vegetarian diet where I would just eat cheese and eggs and sometimes bean patties. When I was off restriction, I was allowed a little bit more freedom with what I could eat because I could buy stuff off of Canteen. I could talk to my family again. A lot of times I would buy ramen noodle soups and just eat one soup a day and call it good. But coupled with my exercise, my constant exercise every day, I began to lose a lot of weight, and I began to go downhill. My thinking was impaired. My decision making was impaired. My ability to maintain focus was impaired. My memory was getting really bad. I couldn't remember what I was thinking about just a few minutes ago. When I was off of restriction, they also gave me my TV back, so I could entertain myself with the TV. And I built a schedule around that, around what programs were on what days and when. It gave me something to look forward to or make each day a little bit different. And so I would get up first thing in the morning, eat breakfast, if I ate breakfast, and I would do my push-ups, I would start walking, and I would watch the news. After that, I would take a nap at about between 7 and 9. I would take a nap. I would get up for lunch. I would eat. I would exercise again, if I ate. A lot of days I didn't. I would give my lunches to my neighbors, and it was cool. I'd give one neighbor breakfast, give the other neighbor lunch, and, give the other neighbor dinner, and just rotate it. And a lot of times in return for my trades, they would give me coffee. So, I was fine with that. I was still drinking coffee. A few months after I got my stuff back, they moved me to another seg unit called A1. It was A1 cell house, and that is where they had the gang program at the time. I had one neighbor because my cell was on the end of the cell block. He was an okay neighbor. We got along just fine, but we didn't talk very much. At that point, my mental state was deteriorating quite a bit, and I didn't feel like talking to people. I just obsessed about cleaning, exercising, not eating, and doing my schoolwork. That was pretty much all I cared about. And I was there for a few more months, and they moved me back to C-Seg. At this point, 1 year had passed since I first came to Seg. When I got back to C1, the unit team saw me, and the unit team was familiar with me because of the hunger strikes and stuff like that from before when I was in C1. The unit team saw me and saw how much weight I had lost and saw, my eyes had sunken in. I looked tired. I looked sick. I didn't look good at all. They immediately started a psychological and medical intervention. The nurse would come by regularly and take my vitals to make sure I was not on the verge of dying. This would happen several times a day, usually 3 or 4 times a day. They would wake me up in the middle of the night to make sure I was still breathing. One morning, shortly after arriving back in C-Seg, they called me up to the unit team's office. They had an officer come down, cuff me up, and escort me to the unit team's office. And I went up there, and they had mental health there. Several people, high-ranking people from the mental health unit there. And the unit team counselors were there, and the unit team manager was there. And they told me that I was going to the mental health unit. They said that they were concerned for my well-being, and I couldn't keep on the way I was, that I could die. And they told me that they were going to bring me some boxes. They wanted me to pack up my stuff. I was going to the mental health unit. So after spending a year in the hole, in segregation under investigation, they were saying that I was no longer under investigation. They were taking me to a mental health unit. I'm going to end this here. I will tell you guys about the mental health unit in another video. I'm Eric. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I will catch you all later. Right, they change.